You know what DK stands for?
Donkey Kong?
Drift King.
Drift. What do you mean, drift?
This is Keiichi Tsuchiya, a Japanese racing driver world famous for popularizing a new style of racing showmanship called drifting. But to truly appreciate just how great of a driver he was, we need to take a deeper look at his career. To start, we have to go all the way back to 1976 and to the relatively small city of Tomi in the Nagano prefecture, just on the edge of Gunma and north of Tokyo. Here, among the quiet mountain roads, you would find a then 20-year-old Tsuchiya doing a practice run down Usui Pass on the border of Nagano and Gunma, driving his four-door Nissan Skyline C10. Now, to outside observers, he might have just seemed like your average street hooligan who just wanted to drive as wild and reckless as possible on the mountains. But those who raced him knew him very differently. He was incredibly quick for how young he was and how slow of a car he was driving, and would often race people in cars worth 3 times what his own was, which gained him serious street cred among his local scene. These races are also where he would develop his signature drifting style, but to talk about that, we first have to talk about one of Tsuchiya's main inspirations, a racing driver known as Kunimitsu Takahashi. Takahashi was a prolific and highly skilled motorcycle racer in his youth, but later transitioned to racing cars, where he was still very quick. One thing that made his racing unique, though, was his signature style. See, many drivers of the day were deathly afraid of oversteer, which was a very valid concern for what passed for safety in the 1960s. But Takahashi, he had other ideas. Many saw him as fearless because his racing style was more similar to the style of early Grand Prix racers of the 40s, 50s, and 60s, where they would often be seen sliding the rear of the car out in order to compensate for the lack of traction required to turn the car into the corner. Now, in the leagues that Takahashi races in, they didn't exactly have the grip and downforce you might find in modern race cars, so he likely took a page from the book of F1 or Le Mans drivers of the day and started sliding his car around corners to get through quicker. Something else it did was give a rush of excitement, not only to him, but to the fans in attendance. This led to the style becoming popular among fans of Takahashi, including Tsuchiya, and would lead to Takahashi eventually being dubbed the father of drifting. So, Tsuchiya begins to take notes from his racing idol, and likely after many weeks of he eventually learned how to control and near perfect his drifting ability, with some who raced him noting his signature style, but many who raced him started talking about him, which led to an opportunity that would change his career trajectory forever. Tsuchiya was offered a race seat for a small team in the Fuji Freshman Series in desperate need of a driver. And they took a chance and went with the street kid because they were basically out of options. One thing that quickly became apparent to Tsuchiya was the differences between him and the others on track, namely in money and experience. Many of the drivers at the track that day had been racing karts since before the age of 10 and had been moving up the ladder ever since, as well as having either a family background of racing or a family well off enough to sponsor a race team. Tsuchiya, he didn't have any of that, and his team was relatively scrappy in comparison. Despite that, he was still able to hold his own on track and would even take a couple podiums in his rookie season. In 1981, he started racing part-time in a division much higher than what he had been racing in. He started in the All Japan Touring Car Championship racing in an 81 Toyota Starlet. He did this while slowly climbing the year-end standings in the Fuji Freshman Series, and by 1984, he would sit atop the series as champion. Although he was the quickest in the Fuji Freshman Series, he was still lacking in the All Japan Touring Car Championship, and he knew what he needed. He needed a better car, and he picked a car that wouldn't only be quicker in races, but would also go on to be a drifting icon. That car being... While many of us today know the A86 as the quintessential drift car, and we may immediately have mental images of mountain passes, Eurobeat, and Takumi Fujiwara digging his inside tires into a drainage ditch, it was not seen this way back in 1984. Then, it was just seen as a regular commuter car, just a higher trim level of the bog standard Toyota Corolla. But what Tsuchiya saw in it was how it could be used on track. With a lightweight body, the combination of McPherson strut front suspension and live coil spring rear axle, it felt super snappy and way easier to turn around corners than his Starlet, paired with the now legendary 4A GE engine outputting over double the power of his old car. Tsuchiya knew this would be a massive upgrade for him, and it was, with it taking the championship in his class at the All Japan Touring Car Championship in 1985. This was also around the time he started to debut his signature drifting style to his new fans on the racetrack. Although this has become more apparent later, Tsuchiya was always a bit of a showman, and liked to give the crowd something to cheer for and be interested in. He would even at one point go as far as to drift the 100R corner at Fuji, which, to give some perspective, looks like this. Yeah. Speaking of Tsuchiya's showmanship, around this time he would also make his proper first television debut, debuting for car and racing magazine Best Motoring. I almost think of it as Japan's early version of Top Gear, even though the original Top Gear and Best Motoring started around the same time, and they had fairly different formats. But with Tsuchiya being one of the hosts, it not only boosted the show's credibility, but also its appeal. And that wouldn't be the only notable media appearance he made in 1987. Around this time, many tuning shops in and around his area started contracting him for performance testing and supervision, and eventually, they had got together with him for a project that would be one part advertisement for the companies and one part Tsuchiya being allowed to drift the mountain passes with an 8.6 tuned by the best these shops had to offer. And the name of this project was Pluspy. This project nearly single-handedly made the drifting style a national craze, with thousands of young teenagers just getting their licenses, watching the video, then taking their newfound skills, or in many cases lack thereof, and drifting down the mountain passes. And it's honestly amazing that it became as popular as it did because this wasn't put on TV. You could only get it through 3 illegal VHS tapes. Speaking of legality, this series landed Tsuchiya in some hot water with the police, who banned the sale of any copies of Pluspy and got the sanctioning body for Japanese races to suspend his racing license, effectively banning him from competition. But it wouldn't be long for him to be back in the racing seat, because his ban was lifted the next year in 1988, and he got right back into it, immediately taking a BMW E30 to third in his class in the All Japan Touring Car Championship. Then, in 1989, he raced in Japanese Formula 3, the division 2 steps down from Formula 1, where he would finish the season in 8th. In 1991, he started driving the legendary Nissan Skyline R32 GTR in the All Japan Touring Car Championship. And while he wouldn't become champion in his class, he was still fairly successful, scoring 9 podiums and a win across a combined 23 races. He even raced a Honda Prelude in the Japanese Endurance Series, scoring second in the 12 Hours of Tsukuba. In 1994, he teamed up with his original inspiration in Kunimitsu Takahashi to race for him in his aptly named Team Kunimitsu, driving their now iconic Advan NSX. He would end up taking this to a win at the 12 Hours of Tokachi, a 5th place finish in the Suzuka 1000, and a win at Le Mans. This guy managed to win the GT2 class at Le Mans in an NSX, beating out his closest competitor by 2 laps. He also entered the All Japan Touring Car Championship in Dodge Viper? Oh yep. He also did 3 separate NASCAR exhibitions, 2 at Suzuka and 1 in California. Man was wheeling a stock car around like he was Davey Allison. In 1999, he would race at Le Mans again, this time in the Toyota GT1. Yep, that Toyota GT1, where he would only finish second, only 1 lap down from the BMW Motorsport team running the incredible BMW V12 LMR. This was also around the time when his drifting crossed over to the US, with early exhibitions at tracks like Willow Springs and others across California popping up and spreading the scene. Many of these exhibitions featured Tsuchiya as one of their judges. This would help contribute to the explosion in popularity drifting experience going into the 2000s, with events such as the D1 Grand Prix and later its offshoot Formula Drift gaining traction in the States, as well as the release of Initial D, which Tsuchiya was a consultant on and one of the main inspirations for the main character in their car, as well as actually featuring in the show as one of Bunta's old racing buddies that moved on to track racing. The funniest one to me was how in 2006 he featured as a fisherman in Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift, but he was also the stunt coordinator and stunt man. Many of the drifting scenes in the movie likely had Tsuchiya behind the wheel. But as all that was happening, he was still racing. From 2000 to 2003, he raced for Team Arda in another NSX, this time in the All Japan Touring Car Championship, now known as the GT500, with his best finish being a 2nd place in the championship in 2001, which really should have been more climactic than it was, because there were 4 teams mathematically eligible for the Cup, with the top 3 being within 2 points of each other going into the final race. But 3rd place finished 12th, the champions that ended up having just enough points to win finished 16th, and Tsuchiya's team, they only needed a 9th place finish to beat the leaders since they had finished back in 16th. But they didn't finish the race after Tsuchiya launched off the rear bumper of the team that was then in 3rd, smashing into the barrier and dropping him from championship contention. This would be somewhat representative of what was to come after. In late 2003, Tsuchiya announced he was retiring from professional racing at the ripe age of 47, and moving into a managerial position for Team Arda. Hearing this news, many felt Tsuchiya needed a send-off fitting of such a long and celebrated career, which he would get from one of his longest partnerships. On January 25th, 2004, Hot Version, a branch of Best Motoring, organized an event for Tsuchiya at the Tsukuba circuit, where fans could see Tsuchiya racing for the last time, and driving some of his most iconic cars from throughout his career, from a TRD-tuned 8611 into the Team Tyson Nissan Skyline R32, and ending the day by trying to set a new GT car record at the track. He did so in his Arta NSX that he had been racing in most recently, and as the sun began to fade, he set out for his final laps. He broke through the 53-second barrier set by the previous record holder in a JGTC spec R34. But then he did this. He beat it again, and this time by a staggering 1.228 seconds, ending his racing career as the fastest man on one of Japan's best tracks. This marked the end of a long and illustrious racing career, having competed and won championships all across Japan and marquee events across the world. Tsuchiya really had done just about everything, sans IndyCar and Formula 1. But Tsuchiya, he still stops by the racetrack every now and then. After leaving the race seat at Arta, he moved into a managerial position where he would stay for a year. Going into the 2010s, Tsuchiya still made appearances on car shows, and was a guiding figure in the development of the Toyota GT86, or FRS, BRZ, that kind of thing, and still showed up at the sidelines of racetracks. But he wouldn't get back into the racing seat on track. Although, if you're ever cruising down the mountain passes of Usui, and you catch a near all-white Toyota 86, just try to keep up as he goes past you.